leadership, and this is a reminder of the continuation of the Cold War policies which were prevalent everywhere until the 90s. And the reason was that America's agendas were subjugated to Israeli agendas. And the building of this axis, which was supposedly to run from India to the borders of Europe, and total ignoring of the Palestinian issue. And of course, the Arab people's response showed that the Palestinian cause can never be ignored and can never be isolated. And this was the reason that both the West and Israel were united in their view of the necessity of destroying Hamas, not to allow it to play any role in the post-conflict Middle East. And the American position when it was exposed that he played a role in the neglecting of the Palestinian cause, and the failure in that was not compensated by working to solve it, but to get rid of Hamas. And the Economist's headline here speaks volumes when on the 28th of October 2020 they said America's test. This was the cover story. And you see Biden walking steadfastly. This had to be a still photograph, because if it was in motion, it would have been difficult to capture him walking steadily like this. And Biden in the beginning was sharing Israel's attitude in facing up to the enemies of the West, even if it meant that to get rid of the entire population of Gaza. The conflict with China and Russia meant that even if the entire population of Gaza was to be destroyed, then that was okay. And after simulating what happened to the Holocaust and Hamas to ISIS, and Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, and Gantz started quoting Winston Churchill when he declared war on Germany, as if they are facing a major superpower. I'm not joking. They quoted Churchill's words as if Hamas is a major power. A caricature nonetheless. They waged a war using the latest technology in land, air, and sea on a small population which has been under siege for nearly 2 decades. But after the first few weeks and the exposure of some of Israel's lies, like we can write pages about this, but we just got a few here by way of an example. And the exposure of these lies, and also the disaster the population of Gaza was subjected to, and also the cracks which started appearing in Western opinion. And this has led to some changes in the conclusion of the American president administration. If Biden were to lose the elections, this will be the first time that happens, despite America's total support of Israel. And also the support for the Democrats amongst the Latinos, which was an alternative to losing the white votes in America, was noticeable. Although Trump's position is not different than Biden's. In the Palestinian cause, there is no difference. In all other cases, there are differences. But the Arab countries now are divided into countries which are taking part in the access we mentioned, or others which are still outside it, but they are all uh, unable to do or take some practical steps which meant that they lost their credibilities. Some of these countries have violated and committed crimes inside their own countries, and you can imagine the Arab media vis-a-vis what's been happening in Palestine and Gaza. That you can imagine from a media point of view what the Arab world would have done if it wasn't for Qatar, which provided a window in the media to cover the events in Gaza and Palestine. And maybe these countries have had to endure the discourse on the necessity to destroy Hamas and show some kind of sympathy towards Palestine until Israel finishes the job. But things happened, especially at the level of the resistance and the continued damage and losses it has inflicted on Israel, and many lies have been exposed since the attack on the Baptist hospital, what's been happening in the fighting itself, and also the apparent support by the Arab peoples everywhere with to the Palestinians. And this has led to the understanding of some Arab countries, as it appears, to go back to some initiatives which were at the time big submissions to Israel. But this realization of the fact that the Palestinian cause is there to stay and to continue is not an awakening, a moral and ethical awakening by the Arab countries. I think the outcome will depend on the outcome of the war itself and to what extent can the Palestinian resistance withstand the pressure. If Israel managed to do what it has announced, like controlling parts of Gaza and to attack safe havens of the resistance, this discourse will change once again from the call to find a just solution for the Palestinian cause to some settlements, whether according to Israeli way, which requires a separate force under the Israeli supervision to control parts of Gaza, or with the participation of some international forces. But in other words, there should be two entities without any sovereignty, both in Gaza and in the West Bank, but without Hamas. It was necessary and still is to defeat this plan, and this all depends on the ability of the resistance movement, who should be steadfast and use a mature political discourse, and in view of the response by large swathes of international and Arab public opinion and the calls for a just solution, and to make arrangements and to go back to some sort of a peace process similarly to that which has been going on for 30 years, and also to rejuvenate the West Bank authorities to enable the passing of such political moves. Of course, all of this will depend on the ability of the resistance to continue fighting, and undoubtedly the Israeli society now is looking inwards. They're feeling isolated, and if what happened on the 7th of October is now, in the eyes of many Israelis, is blamed on Israel's failure, both at the intelligence and military levels because the Netanyahu government occupied itself with other issues that, like the alliance with the religious Zionist movement and the judicial reform, which led to deep divisions within the Israeli society. Of course, Israel's move towards the military solutions now does not necessarily mean that the Zionist discourse is taking the back seat. The opinion polls are showing that some Gantz and Eisenkot and other secularist generals and this marginalizes the alliance with the religious parties and creates the ground for new political alliances. And Israel's behavior is reflected in some sort of a tribal getting together to restore the balance and the ability and the deterrence through acts of revenge against the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza. In my opinion, for the last 40 years there have been no Arab commentators appearing on Israeli media, and they went back to the language of considering all Arabs in Israel as enemies and they should keep silent. And in Israel, it's not a question of democracy of the majority, but it's tolerance of the superior. The Israelis said that this policy are good to reconciliate in peaceful times, but in times of conflict, everything goes back to feeling animosity towards the Arab citizens of Israel, or even the very few Israeli opinions which show some sympathy towards the Palestinians under occupation. Israel has joined the list of countries whereby if you tweet something, it can lead you to be arrested, or by expelling professors and students from a university simply because what they said amounts to, in the eyes of some, to sympathy with the other side. And the focus now on of course, Israel's bombardment of the civilian targets, hospitals, mosques, churches, will be the images that we will all remember forever. Israel's obsession with attacking hospitals and schools will be referred to as the Israeli syndrome. The killing of tens of thousands of people shows this vengeance, this feeling to retaliate, and which did not care even to care for the lives of Israelis and some Palestinian people, workers who worked in Israel, paid for by the Israeli employers, and they got stuck in Israel and they were humiliated and they were mistreated to prove that the Israelis are behaving like a tribe which does not accept anyone else. The two of them were killed. Most of them were tortured, their money was taken, their wages were taken, and then they were thrown into the border. These are just examples of how Israel mistreated people. They are just workers doing a job. Now we'll talk about some of the terminology and is this genocide or not genocide, and all the legal discussion. The Israeli government, Israeli media moved from a feeling of shock and horror and they all started repeating the Israeli narrative in all its details, and to adopt the Israeli narrative, including the beheaded babies and charred bodies, etc. And this reminds us of Gleichschaltung uh, in German, which meant that to focus the entire apparatus and the capabilities of the state and the media and everything towards a certain objective or focus. And we all remember the atmosphere that followed the terrorist attacks on 9/11 in New York against the Arabs and Muslims, and the demonization of Islam itself, and the atmosphere that spread in Europe and the United States after Russia's invasion of the Ukraine by rejecting any reasonable explanation of the perpetrators on the ground that any interpretation is justification, and therefore there should be no interpretation. And they insisted on that any discussion must start with the event itself, as if history began on that date, culminating in the mobilization of war. This attitude argues that there is no solution other than using force, considered self-defense against a shocking act of violence, and explanation for which itself considered an act of violence. The children of light against children of darkness, as Netanyahu himself has hinted. So therefore, a man needs to be blind to accept this kind of vision that dividing people into sons of light and sons of darkness. In the context of inciting NATO countries and their people against Russia, which indeed attacked and occupied Ukraine, it went so far as to seize the assets of businessmen in violation of a sacred capitalist principle, private property, and boycott musicians, sports teams, and even Russian literary works. These are all banned and confiscated. This hysterical behavior can only be described as totalitarian, when even Russian cats were not allowed to participate in competition organized by the International Cat Federation. See totalitarianism. What can it lead to? The democratic nations during times of war conduct their discourse as if they were totalitarian states. And even institutions presumed to be independent of the state engage in agitating, spreading rumors, and disseminating falsehoods against the adversary. In the case of the Hamas operation, the Western countries have behaved as if this is a collective we with Israel against the other, and the media joined the chorus of incitement, abandoning even the most basic principles of neutrality, including passive neutrality. The peril lies in the fact that it was not organized nor in any need of organization, but rather stems from thinking within the same molds and cliches, and also there is no room to mention the humanization of Israeli victims, their personal stories, an extensive space of dedicated and we cannot even begin to list the child language used in reporting about Palestinians composed to the positive standard language used in reporting about Israelis. I believe this matter has been addressed by many researchers in this field. No thinkers considered by the Arabs to be bearers of universal values, whether leftist or liberal, emerge unscathed from this atmosphere. Among them, and also, and between the double standards which covers biases and hypocrisy, no thinkers considered by Arabs to be bearers of universal values, whether leftist or liberal, like Jürgen Habermas and Sheila Ben Habib. Many of the enlightened, using the language of the French 18th century, failed to cross the gap between the universality of values and their continent and their cross-continental scope. When we say there is something universal, and I want to remind those who are talking about the coverage that the entire world is concerned with the Palestinians. The coverage continues. Even with the Ukraine, it was not like this. This CNN, the BBC. I want to remind those who are surprised by the size of the coverage, as if the war is taking place in Europe. The interest here is not focused on Palestine, it's focused on Israel. It's because of Israel. And if the Palestinians were occupied by any other people, the same attention wouldn't have been paid. And you can compare that between the media interest in other conflicts. I say this to other people who are struggling for their own national liberation. Don't envy us. The interest is not in favor of the Palestinian people. It's more to do with the concern for Israel. And for example, neither Yemen, Sudan, Syria, or China or Japan have occupied the same attention, because amongst the peculiarities of the Palestinian question is because of its linkage with the Jewish question, and we have talked about this on many occasions. Habermas lacks noteworthy standing or actual relevance in expressing solidarity with peoples outside of Europe. And when we talk about his statements, along with three eminent colleagues from Frankfurt University, and for reasons which look to him as normal, that the Israeli war that he called revenge from an attack, he said this should not be a reason for any dispute. Habermas preferred to focus on another war, another concern, and that is to avoid civilian casualties, and secondly, to achieve peace in the future. I don't think Habermas can consider Israel as someone or a country that will follow his advice, but he just rhetorically said that to show that the war waged by Israel is conditional, although it's not conditional. And he says concern for the fate of the Palestinian population, and when then genocide is attributed to Israel, he says you can show concern for the fate of the Palestinian people, but do not call it genocide against Palestinians. So far as the Palestinians are concerned, he doesn't show any concern for them. He all wants nobody to cause Israel of committing genocide. And Habermas does not tell us why is this happening to the Palestinian people, and if this is not genocide, then what is? He doesn't want it. Habermas lacks no standing or relevance in much outside Europe, but his public focus revolves around rationalizing political discourse in Europe. His stance on the US war in Iraq in 2003 reflected political naivety befitting a German professor, as Marx might say, believing in its goal of exporting democracy. And also, especially when it comes to events outside of the we of Western world, there are many other academicians, of course, whose stances needs to refer back to, and this is a discussion on whether is this a crime according to international law or not. To have a moral stance for it or against it makes no difference, because it is genocide and it is a crime. What concerns us is what's actually happening. It's strange that people concern themselves with the terminology and whether or not it can be called this or that or not. Of course, the mass killing of civilians, including the indiscriminate aerial bombardment targeting schools and hospitals, is presumed to be morally condemned, irrespective of its terminological designation. And it is a crime against international law because genocide is a term which is defined by international law. We are mentioning this because we are in a place of learning, a university. And Habermas adds that Israel's action, without specifying what these actions are, in no way justify the anti-Semitic reactions, especially not in Germany. And of course, he does not concern himself to look at the situation where the majority of critical responses to Israel that are not anti-Semitic do not concern him. He does not even bother mentioning them. Those anti-Semitic reactions, which he and his colleagues have managed to observe, manifest as a fear among Jews in Germany who are once again exposed to threats to life and limb and have to fear physical violence on the streets. In fact, no actual thing like that has happened in Germany. This is just a reflection of the fear they live. There can be real fears or not. We have no idea. And Habermas names the recognition of Jewish life and Israel's right to exist as central elements in the democratic ethos of the Federal Republic of Germany. And he ends in his statement by saying all those in our country who have cultivated anti-Semitic sentiments and convictions behind all kinds of pretexts and now see a welcome opportunity to express them uninhibitedly must also abide by this. By that he means that this elementary rights to freedom and physical integrity, as well as protection from racist defamation, which he considers rights. Of course, we agree with him in this, but his use of the phrase individuals and apply equally to all, of course, when he says those in our country, he doesn't mean by that German citizens, but this was not accidental. He intends to refer to the Arab and Muslim immigrants to Germany, who, according to him, have their reasons for adopting anti-Semitic ideas. In this view, he, as a German professor, is trying to justify that. This is puzzling. How can he justify that? It is baffling, as I have not heard of any Palestinian, Arab, or global protester that accuses an Israeli of committing these massacres because they are Jewish or because its soldiers are Jewish. Most of the protesters condemn it as an action, but he is trying to displace the discourse into another realm of anti-Semitism. This is what politicians and media people who demonstrated against anti-Semitism in France at the time when Israel was committing its crimes and genocide. They are not protesting against anything specific. They're trying to open a new battle to cover up for the massacres committed by Israel and to redraw the borderlines of what's happening and the freedom of expression, so that freedom of expression should end when the criticism of Israel begins. This is how I understand it. And from the day that Al-Qassam brigades launched this attack, the Palestinians and their supporters have faced many harassments, and even raising the Palestinian flag in Germany became a crime, when in Israel it's not. And in the United States, a white man killed a Palestinian child, and his mother was stabbed many times. And according to the admissions on the 26th of October, a white man in Vermont fired on 3 young men. So far as I know, the president of the United States did not call the families of these people or express sympathy the way he did with the Israeli families of the victims. Of course, he is doing that only to justify war and in line with the strength of his country. Going back to Habermas, doesn't Habermas understand that in anti-Semitism maybe is expressed because many of the potential anti-Semites in the West, amongst the right and the right wing, are amongst the strongest supporters of Israel. And shouldn't that attitude have changed his ideas and his ideas on enlightenment with the number of Muslim and Arab immigrants? He considers this Western civilization as Judo-Christian civilization. I will avoid delving into that because European civilization is Christian, not Judo-Christian, and it has many other components apart from religion, not just Christianity, but other roots, and in the secularist ideas and the science revolution and the absolute monarchies and the discovering the sea lanes routes, trade routes with the rest of the West. And whether we're talking about the Protestant or Catholic Christianity, the other routes are also contributors, and the post-secularism also, and Habermas, when he defends the Christianity of Europe vis-a-vis the immigrants, and in defense of, they have this concern on that the diversity in Europe can threaten the liberal democracy. Maybe he is right in the sense that the immigration waves had led to some impact on that, but not through the contribution of the immigrants themselves, but through the reactions of the right-wing parties. As for the Palestinian cause, Habermas and his colleagues do not show any sensitivity, and this does not matter to us if they kept silence. But they decided to issue this statement which goes against the natural grain of morality, and all what he concerns himself with is a wave of anti-Semitism in his Germany. We are not saying we are the chosen people of God as Palestinians, and nobody has any moral obligation towards us, but he volunteered to issue the statement by insisting on not calling the systematic bombardment of civilians, including schools, mosques, hospitals, refugee camps, which was preceded by calls to expel the mass expulsion of population, which were clearly evident in statements by the Israeli leaders, and coupled with the hysterical positions taken by the Israeli media. He did not condemn that, even when he did not call what happened genocide. Habermas was right in one thing by saying Israel's war was an act of revenge. The act of self-defense should be compatible with international law, but it does not apply to Israel because Israel is occupying power, but what it applies to is the right of people under occupation to have the right of self-defense and the right of the resistance against continued violence practiced by the aggression of the occupation. This is the moral justification of self-defense. As for the international law and the Hague Agreement and other international agreements, the occupying country should not use the acts of resistance as pretext to engage in mass punishment and collective punishment. And also these people have the right, according to the UN Charter, and also this right is not absolute, it's also governed by the Charter of the United States. The second point, we are academics, so we want to have an academic discussion. The other aspect of the Holocaust and Habermas's arguments, although anti-Semitism does not explain everything, we cannot explain genocide of the proportion Israel is waging, and the presence of some tools and pseudo sciences in Europe, which was the result of applying the Holocaust has produced many things, not just anti-Semitism, not just Holocaust. It produced other aspects like considering, according to some European nationalists, that the Jews cannot be integrated into society, and also even at the level of the class struggle, all of this has been part of the Nazi ideology. I don't think the vast majority of European peoples have believed in anti-Semitism. In some countries, which was some countries which were occupied by Germany, there were some people like in France and other countries who colluded in the Holocaust against Jewish population. Of course, nobody demonstrates against those, that they only demonstrate against us. Before the Holocaust, the Zionism was not successful in convincing the Jews to immigrate to Palestine. This major crime which was committed against the Jews has convinced many, and in any event, the Palestinians, according to this, are collateral damage on the margins of solving the Jewish question outside Europe. The Zionist movement used the Holocaust in making sure that Germany should pay compensation, as we all know. Also, Sheila bin Habib, of course, I went into some detail regarding the question of the Holocaust because we really need to discuss that. They used it on what happened on the 7th of October. This is unbelievable. Another colleague of Habermas joined the discussion. They do not want to really just to use our countries, Arab and Muslim countries, have nothing whatsoever to do with that thing at all, the Holocaust. Another philosophy professor joined this discussion, and that she is by and large against occupation, and she calls Gaza a big concentration camp, and Hamas in its discourse in calling for the annihilation of Israel is in her words says Hamas committed war crimes on the 7th of October, and she repeats what the Israeli army has claimed. It says Israel is committing war crimes, which is good, and also that she goes as far as blatantly calling names of people who should replace moderate leaders who should replace Hamas. And of course, she forgets how Israel dealt with these moderate leaders in the West Bank. And she does not understand that legitimacy is gained by the force that engages in resistance against occupation, gains legitimacy. No discussion. This is a fact, and under occupation, armed struggle gains you legitimacy. Of course, she rejects recognition of Israel because Israeli nationalism and Palestinian nationalism are mutual mirror images. We know Zionism is a nationalist movement, and in her opinion is a national liberation organ. But we cannot understand the Palestinian side without looking at and bin Habib belongs to the Zionist left, which is behind the war. So far as she is concerned, there is two nationalist movements fighting over the same piece of land, and what does not allow for some sort of an understanding between them is the extremists in both sides. That's why she condemns Ben Gvir and Smotrich, but whoever is they are not leading the war. The one who is leading the war is the moderates, quote unquote, in her opinion. They are leading the war. The generals, the leftists, secularists, who and when she is invited to lecture in Israel, their wives and daughters attend her lectures. So therefore, in her opinion, Hamas should not prevail. And what about when we know that the cost of destroying Hamas is the destruction of Gaza and the genocide of the Palestinian people? This is not very clear. Bin Habib accuses Hamas of putting her tunnels among the civilians and under hospitals, therefore turning the civilians into collateral damage. So this means that Hamas is responsible for attacking the hospitals. But what about her moral stance? It's lost amidst these conclusions. And the mirror images and also her hatred of Islamists makes her even deny the right of resisting occupation. And this is quite widely spread ideas. So whoever wants to defeat Hamas is not the enlightened Palestinians, but the occupation should defeat Hamas. And the occupation did not conclude that peace should prevail, and they want to control the Palestinian people even tighter. These thinkers have failed in the moral test, and they did not draw clear lines of what the occupying powers should do with the people under occupation. Even if we go along with their assumption that the Palestinian people are hostages to a terrorist organization, which we think they are hostages to siege. Okay, we'll talk about genocide. Ladies and gentlemen, unlike what is, and maybe this is a surprise to some, the legal term genocide did not come into existence only after because of the Holocaust, but it was after, in the trial of the German war crimes in Europe, Axis states, this is a book, Axis Rule in Occupied Europe in 1941 by this author. Genocide does not necessarily mean the immediate destruction of a nation, but what is meant is to show that there is a coordinated plan to destroy the basis of life for a group of people, and not the entire population, but like, for example, dismembering political, cultural, religious, and other institutions, and destruction of the personal safety and even the lives of individuals. Genocide is targeted at a group of people as an entity, and not at individuals as individuals, but as members of the group. And according to the same writer, this is done in two stages, and I don't know, the word is pattern, to destroy the national pattern, and secondly, impose the pattern of the occupiers. This is exactly what's happening in Palestine. And even the population who are allowed to stay can be forced, and it can be imposed on the land itself after expelling the people, and to denationalization, which was used in the past to, and this means the terminology applies completely to the Palestinian case. But this on its own is not enough, because is not what is meant is once denationalization takes place, another pattern is imposed. And of course, when what the author is talking about is not about the Holocaust against the Jews, but the practices by Germans everywhere where there was occupation, including racial discrimination and religious, food security, others. This is a book. But the person who wrote this book formulated the decision by the UN decision regarding genocide. And the General Assembly, for the first time, recognized genocide as a crime against international law in 1946. Resolution number 96 was issued on the 11th of December 1946. This is the text. It's more or less the same what the author has said. Also, in 1948, the Genocide Convention was adopted on the 9th of December. It's generally known as the Genocide Convention, which, and the wording is there on the screen for you. Now I want to move to the first article, which says the contracting parties confirm that genocide, whether committed in times of peace or in times of war, is a crime. People say at times of war, people can happen, but genocide can happen both in times of war and times of peace also. Article number 2, because Israelis say that. Also, the Article 2 will mention this act, that the partial or total destruction. So whether we're talking about 10, 50,000 people, can talk about individuals, groups, but what determines genocide or not is not the number of the people killed, but the aim behind it. If the objective is to destroy a people, a group, in the context of genocide, not just killing itself, killing individuals, but the objective is to destroy its people, their entity, their culture, religion, whatever. If it's done in this context, we shouldn't wait till they kill the entire population of Gaza or expel them all. But because what's happening is happening in the context of this is genocide, the context of destroying them. This is what the UN says. So this is not a question of terminology. This is a question of taking an ethical stand. When after World War II, humanity decided on this terminology because it has something. It has some moral stance. There's an international community. They have common values, including avoiding the repetition of genocide. So this is the I think they waste our time by discussing the terminology. This is the systematic destruction of hospitals and schools, and they hide behind terminology. They say that for years, saying that Hamas are behind underneath these hospitals. If they were and they run away, they're not going to leave their weapons behind for you to come and picture them. Uh, you should not bomb hospitals because people go there to take shelter. Because, for example, if you have nowhere else to go but to a church or a school or a mosque or a hospital, you shouldn't bombard them. You shouldn't negotiate to achieve your objectives. This is a very dangerous precedent that thinkers in the world engage in this kind of practice. And now to the Roma Statute, uh, also Article 6 it says numbers of a group, not the entire group, even if it's aimed at groups. So therefore, all the discussion is on the declared Israeli intentions, and it is genocide. Article 6 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, adopted at the UN General Assembly on 17 July 1998. Also, what matters is it's the same explanation, but here they go into more details of what can be considered as genocide. Okay, article number 3. The details take pages, but there are articles 3, 4, and others. Is to perpetrator intended to destroy in whole or in part that national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. Of course, the intentions, we used it as footnote in the beginning of this lecture. There is a long list of intentions declared by Israel. It's not a secret. And also in the negotiations with Egypt and other countries, and also squeezing people to move from the north to the south of Gaza, and the intention of forceful expelling these people. There is another point, and I hope to finish by this, and that is the right of self-defense. Article 51 of the United Nations Charter recognizes the inherent right of individuals or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. Measures taken by the members in the exercise of this right of self-defense shall be immediately reported to the Security Council and shall not in any way affect the authority and responsibility of the Security Council under the present Charter to take at any time such action as it deems necessary in order to maintain or restore international peace and security. Israel, the United States, European countries, all of them use this article as Israel's right. What about you as Palestinian? Before you say anything, you must condemn the 7th of October. Then you accept Israel's right to self-defense. In the past, Israel used the right to self-defense in building the separation wall. This was based on Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. In 2004, the General Assembly went to the International Court of Justice to ask its opinion, and this is the most one of the best resolutions that Israel does not recognize or accept, similarly to all other resolutions. In 2004, the International Court of Justice recognizes the existence of an inherent right of self-defense in the case of armed attack by a state, blah blah blah, does not apply to Israel, because Article 51 of the Charter recognizes, etc., but Israel does not claim that these attacks are attributed to a foreign country, and also Israel exercises control over occupied Palestinian territories, and the threat comes from within these territories. So therefore, this is different to what the UN resolutions, Security Council resolutions 1368 2001 and 1373 2001. So therefore, Israel could not in any event invoke these resolutions in support of its claim to be exercising a right of self-defense. You cannot be clearer than that, although there is day and night keep reminding us of it. So even the right of self-defense, according to UN Charter and the ruling of the International Court of Justice, you cannot claim to do anything under that, exactly like the right to resistance. The spirit of the international community and the UN Charter, the right to self-defense when it turns into killing 7,000 children and many thousand women, I think ultimately the number of the people killed will reach 20,000 when they bring out salvaged bodies from under the rubble. This can only indicate a moral decline to justify this number of dead people. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azmi Bishara, for this very valuable and rich presentation talking about the political, the legal, and the moral dimensions. And I would like to add to what you said, if the number of persons that have been killed, the martyrs, if it reaches 20,000 or more than that, that means that 1% of the total population had been killed, because we're talking about 2.3 million. So if it is 20,000, the number of martyrs, then this constitutes 1%. This does not mean that the number is small in comparison to the total population.